The ox cart turned sideways on the muddy path, and Kofi's body flew like a leaf caught in a windstorm. His wife, Amma, watched from 50 paces away, her hands frozen mid-motion, a calabash of millet still balanced on her head. She heard the sound before she understood it, the crack of bone, the shriek of wood, the terrified braying of animals. The cart's wheels crushed his leg. The traders scattered. And in that moment, before anyone else moved, before the merchants on the path even understood what they were witnessing, Kofi was already screaming. His screams echoed through the village of Kethelo like the cry of a wounded animal. For 3 days and 3 nights, he did not stop. His leg had turned black as burnt wood, the flesh swelling until the skin could no longer hold it. The village healer, an old woman named Adwoa, who had delivered half the children in Kethelo, examined the wound and shook her head. "The poison is climbing," she said to Amma, her voice low and certain. "It is moving through his blood toward his heart. If it reaches there, he will die within a week." Amma sat beside him and wept, her tears falling onto his burning skin like rain on cracked earth. She had been married to him for 12 years. They had no children, though they had prayed for them every new moon. She had grown thin from working his fields during the planting season and the harvest, thin from bearing his moods when he was tired, thin from the worry that she would never give him a son. But she had never left his side, not once. She washed his body with cloths dipped in cool water. She held his hand through the fever dreams. She sang the old songs her mother had taught her, songs meant to call the spirits of healing. On the 4th morning, just as Adwoa was mixing herbs to prepare his body for death, something changed. A woman appeared at the compound gate. Her name was Zainab, and she was a trader's daughter who had returned to the village of Kethelo only months before, after living for 5 years in the coastal settlements where ships brought goods from across the Great Water. She was known for her intelligence and her preparation. She carried medicines that other traders brought from those distant places, plants she had dried herself and stored in woven baskets, oils she had learned to blend with precision. Her hands were always stained with the colors of roots and bark. Her eyes were sharp as a bird's. When she heard about Kofi's injury, something moved in her that she could not name. It was not quite pity. It was not quite interest. It was something in between, something that felt like purpose. She came to the compound without being invited, walking past Amma as if her distress was merely a shadow. "Let me see him," Zainab said to Amma. And Amma, delirious from exhaustion and 4 days of constant weeping, simply stepped aside. Zainab worked through that night and the next. She cleaned the wound with water she had boiled herself, removing the dead flesh with a careful hand. She packed the open wound with a paste made from herbs and tree bark, mixing it with oils that made Kofi's eyes water. She gave him drinks from a gourd, bitter things that made him sleep without screaming. She did not sleep herself. The neighbors who passed saw her sitting beside him through the darkness, her hands moving with purpose, her eyes never closing. By morning, the black had stopped spreading. By the 3rd day, his fever broke like a storm passing over. By the 2nd week, he was sitting upright, his eyes clear again, speaking in sentences that made sense. The village healer, Adwoa, examined the wound and said nothing, but her silence was louder than any words. She had seen death leave a body. She had seen it replaced by something else. Amma felt something shift in her chest, like the breaking of a calabash. She had saved him once, with her tears and her prayers and her constant presence. But Zainab had saved him again, with her knowledge and her will, with skills that Amma did not possess and could never learn. The village noticed this divide immediately. It became the only thing anyone spoke about. At the market, women stopped their trading to gossip. "Did you see how the trader's daughter looks at him?" one whispered, balancing her clay pot on her head as her fingers worked the goods she was selling. "Did you see how he looks back?" another answered, shaking her head in grave agreement. "The wife is becoming invisible." The mothers gathered at the river, filling their water calabashes with mechanical movements while their voices rose and fell. "That one, Amma. She will lose him," they said, pulling their daughters close, as if the losing of a husband was contagious. A woman who can only love is not the same as a woman who can save. A man knows the difference. The elders gathered under the great tree, their weathered faces dark with thought. "This is trouble," the oldest one said, his voice like dry leaves rustling in wind. "This is the kind of trouble that does not stay small." Kofi's leg healed with remarkable speed. The flesh that had been black and dying grew new and brown. Within a month, he was walking without help, his weight balanced on both feet. Within 6 weeks, he was working again, moving through the village with a slight limp that would fade with each passing day. He could run if he wanted to. He could work in the fields for 10 hours without stopping. He was whole again, restored, reborn. His wife Amma felt hope bloom in her chest like a rare flower. They had survived this terrible thing. They would survive anything now. She began to plan for the future. Perhaps this year they would finally plant more yam fields. Perhaps next year, if the gods were kind, she would bear a child. She told herself these things at night as she lay beside her husband, but she did not say them aloud. She was afraid that speaking hope into the world would break it. But Zainab still came to the compound. She came in the mornings with medicines for his pain, even though his pain was gone. She came in the afternoons with foods she had cooked, even though Amma could cook well and had prepared his meals for 12 years. She came with reasons that made sense on the surface, but no sense in the deeper places. And Kofi, with each visit, seemed to see his wife less clearly. It was as if Amma was becoming transparent, a ghost moving through the compound. One afternoon, Kofi sat on his carved wooden stool outside the compound, the stool his father had carved from ebony wood before he died. His leg was completely healed. He could feel no pain at all. And Zainab sat beside him, close enough that their shoulders nearly touched. Amma was inside, pounding yam in the mortar, the sound of her pestle hitting the ground in rhythm with her heartbeat. Pound. Pause. Pound. Pause. The rhythm was hypnotic and sad. "You owe her your life," Amma had said to him that morning. Not angry, just stating what was true as if it was a simple fact, like saying the sun rises in the east. "I owe her my leg," Kofi had replied, and he had not looked at his wife when he said it. "Not my life. My life was always mine." But that was not what he believed anymore. Something had shifted inside him, a fundamental change in how he understood the world. He had begun to believe that Zainab had given him something more valuable than healing. She had given him the feeling of being chosen. Amma had loved him because she was married to him, because the marriage contract said she must. Zainab had chosen him. She had come without being called. She had worked without being asked, and in that choice was a power that his wife's ordinary love could never match. "She looks at me like I am special," he said to himself, sitting on that wooden stool, and he did not realize how quiet his voice was. He did not realize that Zainab could hear him, that she was smiling a small, satisfied smile, the smile of a hunter who has cornered her prey. The elders gathered under the great tree again, and this time their conversation was different. "This is the way of men," the oldest one said, his voice like dry leaves crumbling to dust. "A man will trade gold for the feeling of being wanted, even if the gold is true and the wanting is false. A man will abandon the well for the mirage, and he will convince himself that the mirage is real." The others murmured in agreement, their voices blending together. They began to repeat the old saying that had been spoken since their grandfather's time, the saying that always came true. "A debt repaid with betrayal will come back to the debtor tenfold," they said. "A debt repaid with betrayal will come back to the debtor tenfold." Kofi's choice came on a morning when the sky was heavy with coming rain. The air smelled like wet earth and electricity. Zainab came to the compound dressed in a new wrapper, a cloth dyed in colors of deep blue and gold, colors that cost silver. She did not ask permission to enter. She walked past Amma as if her wife was a shadow, invisible, irrelevant, a thing that did not deserve to be seen. Kofi stood up from his stool. He looked at his wife of 12 years, the woman who had nursed him through his fever, who had wept over his broken body, who had given him her youth and her strength without ever asking for anything in return. Amma was looking at him, with her hand still holding the pestle, her mouth slightly open, as if she could not quite believe what was about to happen. "I am leaving with Zainab," he said. His voice was steady. His eyes did not meet his wife's. "I will send money. I will send enough." Amma did not scream. She did not beg. She did not throw things or curse his name. She simply sat down on the ground, her wrapper falling around her like a collapsed cloth, and she understood that the world had broken in a way that could never be repaired. Her husband had remade himself in the image of Zainab's love, and in doing so, he had erased the woman who had saved him first. The village erupted like a pot of water suddenly set on fire. At the market, the women stopped selling completely. They gathered in a tight cluster, their voices rising and falling like a storm wind. "He left her? After 12 years?" one shouted. "After she saved his life?" another cried out. "Who does he think he is?" "That Zainab, she is poison, pure poison." The merchants shook their heads and refused to trade with Zainab's family. The farmers would not sell to them. The fishermen would not give them fish. Within 2 weeks, Zainab and Kofi packed their belongings into baskets. Everything they owned went into those baskets. They left at dawn, before the village could see them go, though everyone watched from their compounds anyway. They traveled 3 days' walk to a settlement called Kibwe, a place where no one knew them, where Kofi's name meant nothing and Amma's tears had not reached. Kofi used the money from selling his fields that had belonged to his family for generations, to buy a small house near the market. Zainab wore expensive wrappers and beads now, the kind that cost silver, the kind that made the other women in Kibwe turn their heads when she passed. They were seen together at the market. They walked through the settlement as if they had invented love, as if no one before them had ever understood what it meant to choose each other. For a time, perhaps 2 seasons, perhaps 3, people said they were happy. Zainab bought more beads. Kofi built a new compound wall. They hired workers to help them. They ate well. They slept peacefully. But happiness that is built on a foundation of cruelty is not happiness. It is a mirror that shows you your own face, and if that face is capable of betraying the woman who saved your life, then what you see will haunt you forever. 3 years passed. 3 long years of waking and sleeping, of seasons changing, of the slow understanding that begins in the bones. Zainab began to notice that Kofi looked at her the way he had once looked at Amma. Not with love, but with gratitude. And gratitude, once it has become the only feeling, begins to feel like a cage. She had saved him, yes. She had given him back his life, but he had never asked to be saved. He had never offered her a choice in the matter. He had simply decided that she owned him, and now she was supposed to love a man who believed himself to be her property. One morning, Kofi woke to find the house empty. Zainab had taken the silver and the expensive wrappers. She had taken the beads and the fine cloths. She had taken everything that could be carried and fitted into baskets. A trader was leaving Kibwe to go north to other settlements, and she had gone with him. She had left a single message, carved into a piece of bark. "The debt is paid." Kofi was left alone, not injured, not dying, but alone in a way that was worse than either of those things. He had lost the woman who had loved him without reason, the wife who had wept over his wounds. He had lost the woman he had loved for the feeling of being chosen, the healer who had demanded his gratitude. And he had discovered that he had lost himself somewhere in between the two, in that dark space where a man forgets who he is and becomes only what someone else has made him. He wandered for a year. He took work as a laborer in different settlements. He ate when he could find food. He slept under trees. At night, he remembered Amma's face, the way she had looked when he said he was leaving. He remembered it so clearly that it became painful to remember anything else. He returned to the village of Kethelo on a morning when the sun was rising red through the dust, painting the earth in colors of rust and blood. The path he walked was the same path he had traveled 3 years before, but it felt like a different world. The children who saw him did not recognize him. The merchants looked at him and looked away. The elders did not welcome him. The women at the market did not greet him. Only Amma, who was sitting at the river drawing water, looked up when she heard his voice. She was drawing water into a calabash, moving with the same graceful motion she had used for 12 years before everything broke. She was thinner than he remembered, or perhaps he was simply seeing her clearly for the first time. Her hair was wrapped in a cloth of deep indigo, and she wore bracelets of bronze on both wrists. These things told him that she had found peace, that she had moved beyond the destruction he had caused. He approached her slowly, his feet moving through the shallow water. He knelt beside her on the red earth, his fine cloth soaking up the mud and the river water. His shoulders shook. He wept. He wept for the years he had stolen from her. He wept for the woman who had saved him twice and received nothing but cruelty. He wept for his own blindness, the way he had confused gratitude with love, indebtedness with desire. "I cannot ask for forgiveness," he said, his voice breaking like a bird's wing. "I cannot ask you to take me back. I can only tell you that I have learned the cruelest truth a man can know. A man who forgets who helped him when he was nothing cannot recognize his own worth when he becomes something again." Amma looked at him with eyes that had become hard as stone. Or perhaps they had always been that way, and he was only now seeing them. She did not help him up. She did not speak to him. She stood up from her crouching position, the water from her calabash sloshing gently against the sides of the clay vessel. She walked back to the village, leaving him kneeling in the mud and the shallow water. The elders made their judgment that same day. Kofi could return to the village if he wished, but only as a laborer, a man with no land and no standing. He would work the fields of other men, men he had once known as equals. He would not own land. He would not trade in the market. He would not marry again. He would rise every morning before dawn and remember what he had done, and in the evening, when he rested, he would remember it again. Every day for the rest of his life, he would carry the weight of his choice like a stone tied to his back. Amma married another man 2 years later, a cloth trader named Mensa, who had loved her from a distance for all those years while she was with Kofi. He was kind in the way that comes from a full heart, not from obligation. He had no need to be chosen because he had already chosen her. They had 3 children together, 2 daughters and a son, and Amma taught each of them to remember the story of their mother's first husband. Not to shame him, but to understand something true about the world, something that could protect them. "A woman who sacrifices for you deserves your entire life," she told her daughters, braiding their hair in the evening while the fire burned low and the smoke rose up toward the stars. "If you forget that, if you believe that gratitude can be replaced by the excitement of being chosen, then you will become like Kofi. And Kofi's punishment is not the work or the exile. His punishment is knowing every day that he destroyed the only thing in his life that was real." The story of Kofi and Amma and Zainab became a legend in the village of Kethelo. Mothers told it to their daughters while braiding their hair. Fathers told it to their sons while teaching them to fish. The old saying was repeated so often that it became part of the rhythm of the village itself, woven into the fabric of how people understood love and loyalty. "A debt repaid with betrayal will come back to the debtor tenfold," they said. "A debt repaid with betrayal will come back to the debtor tenfold." And so the village learned that the woman called wife, the one whose love seemed ordinary because it asked for nothing, was true gold. And the woman who appeared like an angel, who demanded to be seen as the savior, was the true rat, scurrying from one grateful man to the next. always certain that she deserved more than what love freely given could ever provide. But the man who learned too late? He became the bridge between them, a warning carved into the memory of everyone who came after.